Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you. If you're watching live stream this morning, we welcome you in as well. And we're going to continue to get messy this morning. We've been in a sermon series. This is our third Sunday now on messy. How messy people who make up a messy church impact a messy world. Because sometimes we forget that and we tend to just want to isolate ourselves or put ourselves in a cocoon and forget that the world is a messy place or, just kind of wrap ourselves in protective bubble wrap. In fact, we did that to give you an image of this a couple of Sundays ago. This is Christian. We baptized. We wrapped him. We wrapped him in bubble wrap to show us that this is how we often live as Christians. We just want to keep ourselves insulated and isolated. Last week I gave you another image. Sometimes we just want things to be sanitized or disinfected. And a lot of times we hear things from you like, why are we doing this in church? Or we shouldn't be doing that. And the reason we say those things is because we want to just take a Clorox swipe and make everything really nice and clean. But the world's not like that. It's a messy place. And so during this message series, we're challenging ourselves to get out in the world, to get our hands dirty, to take off the bubble wrap, to put down the Clorox wipes. And what we've been doing is we've been praying a very simple prayer. If you're joining us for the very first time this morning, or if you haven't been praying this, I really, really encourage you. Very simple. Every day, here's what we're asking you to do. Pray, God, send us to those that nobody else sees or wants. This way, God, send me to those that nobody else sees or wants. We've been asking you to pray that prayer while we're in this message series and to just see what God does with it. To be obedient to where God is asking you to go. Yes, it'll be out of your comfort zone. Yes, it might be difficult. Yes, it will require sacrifice. Send me to those that nobody else sees or wants. And so this morning, in that vein, we're going to talk specifically about those in prison. We're going to be talking about those that are on the margins, the fringes, those that are often forgot about in our culture. Aldersgate has a real heart for prison ministry. We have a vital prison ministry, and here's why. 3 reasons. Number 1, we believe that God has a heart for prison ministry. Psalm chapter 69 verse 33 says this, "For the Lord hears the needy and does not despise his own people who are prisoners." God has a heart for the prisoners, and we want to have our hearts broken for the things that break the heart of God. The second reason is because Jesus made prison ministry part of his ministry here on this earth. In fact, out of Luke chapter 4, this is Jesus' inaugural address. He stands up in front of the church when he begins his ministry, and he says, this is what I'm about, this is what I'm here for. I'm going to abbreviate it just a little bit, but here's what it reads. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed." If Jesus' ministry was to go to those who are in prison, shouldn't our ministry to be to those who are in prison? And so because of that, we're also encouraged by Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 25. I shared this a little bit with you last week, that Jesus says at the end, he's going to separate everybody into 2 groups. There's going to be that group that spends eternity in heaven with him, and there's going to be that group that's separated eternally from him. And the group that's going to spend eternity with him, they're going to be somewhat confused as to, what are you talking about, Jesus? When did we do all these? And he's going to say, listen, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And the least of these, he says this in Matthew chapter 25, when you visited me in prison. God has a heart for those in prison. Jesus' ministry was to those in prison. And therefore, our heart and ministry should be to those in prison as well. That's why Aldersgate has a heart for prison ministry and why we have very vital prison ministries. Let me just share a little bit about that with you this morning. First of all, Aldersgate, some of you may not know this if you're new to Aldersgate, we have another campus out at the Lubbock County Detention Center, the Lubbock County Jail. We call it the Impact Campus. If you don't know anything about the county jail, it's divided into clusters. Our campus is Cluster 6 out at the Lubbock County Detention Center. Out at the detention center, each cluster has pods, like you see here in the picture. And in Cluster 6, in all the clusters, there are 4 pods. And each one of those pods can have, usually we're ministering to, it's completely voluntarily, but there's usually 75 men or so in each pod. And so in Cluster 6, we're ministering to those 4 pods of men. We go out there every week. We're ministering to them, worship services out there. We've been doing this for 2.5 years. In March of 2014, the Impact Campus officially launched. Let me share with you, since March of 2014, when we launched the Impact Campus, we have celebrated 166 baptisms in Cluster 6 at the Lubbock County Detention Center. In 2.5 years. Now, in that same time frame, in 2.5 years, here at Aldersgate, we have celebrated 84 baptisms. So if you do the math on that really quickly, we've baptized twice as many out at the Impact Campus as we have here at the Indiana Avenue campus. And listen, I've got some exciting news to share with you today. Things are changing out at the Impact Campus. We have a new pastor at the Impact Campus. Jaime Coy is our new pastor out at the Impact Campus. Jaime, are you in here this morning? Jaime, would you stand up so everybody can see you? This just happened. We're so excited to bring Jaime on board and have him serving as our new Impact Campus pastor. He's going to be out at a table out there this morning, and I would encourage you to stop by and see him. We're going to continue our discipleship training at the Impact Campus. We're bringing back a worship service, a full-blown worship service out at the Impact Campus that will happen weekly. And there are tons of places for you to get plugged in, not only inside the detention center, but outside the detention center. And so I would really encourage you to take note of that this morning. There are tons of other prison ministries that Aldersgate's a part of. One of those is Kairos Prison Ministry. If you don't know anything about Kairos Prison Ministry, maybe you've heard of Walk to Emmaus. Walk to Emmaus, it happens outside. Kairos is a walk to Emmaus inside a prison. And so a group of men or women, but usually men, go into a prison and they basically host a 3-day retreat inside a prison. And I got the opportunity to work my first Kairos in May of this year. I didn't really know why God was calling me there, but I was obedient and I went to where he was calling me. And let me tell you what I learned. I learned what we just sang about this morning. I saw grace in a whole new way. And I was really, thinking, hey, I'm going to be on this neat ministry and I'm going to be part of seeing lives transformed. Guess whose life was transformed greater than anybody else there? Mine. Kairos is an incredible prison ministry. We've got some volunteers here that are at the Kairos table this morning too, and they would love for you to stop by and visit with them if you want to get connected or get involved. And there's tons of ways. You don't have to be on a Kairos weekend. Those things cost money to run. They would gladly take your money this morning. They want your prayers, and there's a way that you can sign up to pray for Kairos ministries. They'll just give you more information, and I would encourage you to stop out there and visit with them this morning. We work with a ministry called Kairos Outside. And this is a walk to Emmaus for those on the outside of the prison. So for those that are spouses or parents or children or related to anyone on the inside, there's an opportunity for them to gather together and hear the same grace and receive the same grace with people who have similar situations and understand what they're going through in life. And we have lots of people here at Aldersgate that volunteer with Kairos Outside, and we have a group of them out there this morning, and they need money as well, and they need your prayers, and they need you to stop and just say, hey, I might have an interest in helping with Kairos Outside, and I would encourage you to stop by and visit with them this morning. We work with a ministry called Exodus Prison Ministry. In fact, this is housed right here in Lubbock on 34th Street. Every time you give to Aldersgate, part of your giving goes to Exodus Prison Ministry. And what Exodus Prison Ministry does is they send discipleship teachings to prisons all across the state and across the United States. And so I want you to notice in the picture that's on the lower part there, her name is Sylvia Heel. She comes here to Aldersgate. You probably don't ever see her because she comes to the 9 o'clock service. Sylvia Heel is 88 years old. For 10 years now, she goes down to Exodus Prison Ministry weekly and stuffs envelopes with the discipleship teachings that get mailed out every month. If an 88-year-old can do it, you can too. Because God's called her to that place. Another place that your money goes when you give here to Aldersgate is to a prison ministry called Freedom in Jesus Ministries. Don Castleberry and Stephen Canup are back here in the back. Would you guys stand up so everyone can see you guys? Don is the founder, and Stephen in the red shirt there is the executive director. These guys run Freedom in Jesus Ministries. They have a table out there this morning. I'm going to encourage you to stop by and see them. And here's why. They do crusades in the prisons, so they go in and do weekend crusades in the prisons. I got to share this with you because I just found this out this week. But in the first 7 months of this year, January through July, because of these crusades in prisons, they have seen 700 men come to Christ for the very first time. This year. Now, I don't know about you, but that makes me excited to give, right? Because I haven't been on one of their crusades, but I know that God is doing incredible things through their crusades. Stephen published a book called Jailhouse Religion, and that book, Aldersgate helped distribute 70,000 copies of that into prisons. And of course, not everyone who's influenced by the book writes back, but of the ones that were distributed, they know that 42 people received Christ because they read a book, because someone knew they weren't forgotten. Aldersgate has a heart for the prisoners. We're vital in many different areas of prison ministry, and we take pride in that. And here's why. If you've got a Bible, I want you to go to Acts chapter 12 this morning. If you got your phone, you can find it on your phone as well. Acts chapter 12. While you're finding Acts chapter 12, let me tell you what's going on here. There are lots of places in the Bible where we see God's heart for the prisoner. There are lots of places in the Bible where we see an actual scene that occurs in prison. And in Acts chapter 12, this is one of those scenes. Now, what's happening here is Jesus' ministry on earth is come to an end. He's been crucified. He was placed in the tomb. He rose from the dead. He's ascended back into heaven. He left his disciples to start the church, which they did, and because they've started the church, they are now beginning to be persecuted, some of them to the point of martyrdom. And that's what happens here in Acts chapter 12. Start reading with me at verse 1. It says, "About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands." That's what Jason did to his kids yesterday. "About that time, Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James, the brother of John, with the sword." James was the disciple James. "And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter, also another one of the disciples, the leader of the church, in fact. This was during the days of unleavened bread, and when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him." Luke wants us to know that this is overkill. Okay? 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out to the people. So the church actually spread with this persecution, but we see that James has been killed. Now Peter has been arrested and thrown into jail, unjustly, may I say. And we know that around the world today, there are tons of people who are sitting in jail unjustly because of their faith. But we also know that there are tons of people sitting in jail because of their crime. Now, there are a few small percentage that are there and they are actually innocent. But most, how do we say it, have done the crime so they have to pay the time. Right? That's how our society has operated for centuries, even back to the first century. That's how our culture has operated, is that this place called prison or jail would be a place of punishment for those who haven't followed society's rules or hasn't done everything exactly right. And if you do the crime, you have to do the time. Kind of like 23-year-old Jake Strotman. Jake Strotman did the crime, and so you know how he's paying the time. His time is that he has to sit through 12 consecutive Baptist church services. This is too good to make up. I'm telling you the truth. This came out of Christianity Today, all right? I'm not going to think about it. This is just what happened. Jake Strotman, he's 23 years old. He got into a fight with a street preacher outside a hockey game in Cincinnati, Ohio. The street preacher is a Baptist preacher. Guess which church Jake got sentenced to? When he went in front of the judge, what would typically be a 90-day jail sentence, instead, the judge said, you're going to go sit and listen to him for 12 Sundays in a row. So every Sunday, he has to go to that Baptist church. He has to sit there for 90 minutes. He has to take the bulletin up to the preacher, get it signed, and take it back to the judge. Right? It reminded me of the time that Blake, he's our oldest, he's 18 now, and this was about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe longer, time gets away from me, but I remember we were having a discussion with him. I don't even remember what the discussion was about, but obviously he wasn't in compliance with whatever Amy and I were asking him to do. And I think he was arguing about having to go to church or something like that, and so I just remember having this discussion and Amy saying to him, not only are you going to go to the 11:30 service, but you are going to the 9 o'clock service. And I remember when Blake walked off thinking to myself, I think we just punished him by making him go to church. He's a preacher's kid. He would say he's used to that. But listen, most of us have never been sentenced to going to a Baptist church 12 Sundays in a row. Most of us in this room have never served time in jail. Some of you can tell an interesting story about that one night. But most of us have never spent time in jail. But all of us know what it's like to be locked up. Locked up in our fears, locked up in our insecurities, locked up in our hurts, in our habits, in our hang-ups, locked up in a relationship that's going south, locked up in a financial crisis, locked up in emotional baggage that we can't escape from, locked up in a past that we can't escape from. You see, what we need to understand is that every one of us in this room know what it's like to be locked up. Every one of us know what it's like to be a prisoner. In Jesus' inaugural address, when he said, I came to set the captives free, he wasn't just talking about literal captives, he was talking figuratively about captives. Because he's the one who sets us free. And you see, what I realized on that Kairos is that some days and in some situations, I find myself behind bars that are just as solid as they do. In a free world. You see, we're all prisoners. And in order to understand God's heart for the prisoner and Jesus' ministry to those in prison, we have to realize that we are all prisoners. And when we realize that we're all prisoners, look what happened. Verse 5, chapter 12, verse 5. So Peter was kept in prison. But earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. Let me read that again. You see, what happens is, if you know the rest of the story, it's fairly dramatic. I mean, it's a good story, and it makes a good storytelling. But because of that, we often miss verse 5 of chapter 12. Peter was kept in prison, but earnest prayer for him was made to God by the church. Some of you would say to me, and I've heard this before, well, God's just not calling me to prison ministry. Do you pray? Because if you do, you're called to prison ministry. Should you pray? If you should, God is calling you to prison ministry. Do you need to pray? Yes, God is calling you to prison ministry because God says we are all in prison. And God is calling the church to earnest prayer for those who find themselves locked up. And here's why. Because no one is beyond the reach of God. No one is beyond the reach of God. It doesn't matter how evil or heinous. It doesn't matter how mild or slight. It doesn't matter if it's literal or figurative. No one is beyond the grace of God and his reach and his ability to redeem us. Well, I'm not called to visit those in prison. Maybe not. But here's what I'm going to tell you this morning. I think there's a good number of you sitting here in this room this morning that the Holy Spirit's going to tug on your heart today and say, step out of your comfort zone. Sacrifice. Take the bubble wrap off. Quit using the hand sanitizer. Get messy. I'm calling you to those that are on the fringes of society, the margins of culture, the ones that nobody else sees or wants. I was in prison, and you visited me. For some, maybe it means a prison writing ministry. In fact, this morning we're giving you opportunity. There's several stations around the lobby where you can stop and just write a message to those out at the Impact campus that we minister to. For some of you, maybe it is just that point of prayer, but I want to share with you Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3. Here's what it says. Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them. You see, we have to understand that we're all in prison, whether it's literal or figurative. We're all locked up. We're all in bondage. And Jesus comes to set us all free. And sometimes we find ourselves locked up, and sometimes we find ourselves on the freeing end. And all the time, even on the freeing end, we're still dealing with our own prisons. Remember those in prison as though you are in prison with them. The church is called to pray and visit those in prison. Let's see how the rest of the story goes. Now, when Herod was about to bring Peter out on that very night, he was sleeping between two soldiers bound with two chains, and sentries before the door were guarding the prison. Again, Luke wants us to know this is overkill. Herod did not want Peter to escape. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell off his hands. Listen, church, that's what we pray for. When we pray for those who are in prison, whether it's literal or figurative, we are praying that the chains would fall off their hands. The chains would fall off their hearts. The chains would fall off their minds. The chains would fall off their feet. That's what the church was praying for, and God delivered. The chains fell off his hands, and the angel said to him, "Dress yourself and put on your sandals," and he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and followed him. He did not know that what was being done by the angel was real. He thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and the second guard, they came to the iron gate leading into the city. It opened for them of its own accord, and they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel left him. Verse 11, when Peter came to himself, he said, "Now, I am sure that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." Listen, when you read that story, you can't help but know this one thing. God does his best work in prison. God does his best work in prisons. Not just literal, but figuratively. Because you see, when we get into that place where we have hit rock bottom, where everything has been stripped away, where we realize that we are not in control like we thought we were, that is when we get to the point where we are willing to look inside ourselves and also see the grace and mercy that God has for us. When we get to that place, God is able to release the chains from us. He's able to release the shackles off of our hands, our feet, our hearts, and our mind, because we realize that he is the one that's in control. He is the one that loves us. His grace is enough. And we can reach out and accept. I could sit here this morning and I could tell you story after story after story of those that have been in prison, that have found Christ, that now have an incredible testimony because of what Christ has done in their life during that time. I can tell you that when I was on that Kairos in May, 40-something team members, 5 of them themselves had literally been behind bars. And now we're working in a freedom ministry to show others the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ. Their stories had impact that mine would never have. I can tell you about prison fellowship ministries. Any of you familiar with that? It's a ministry that's reached millions of prisoners around the world. It was started by a guy named Chuck Colson. Anybody familiar with Chuck Colson? Chuck Colson was a special advisor to President Nixon, although he wasn't that special because of this little thing called Watergate. And that landed Chuck Colson smack dab in the middle of prison. And it was there in prison that because of some freedom ministry, Chuck Colson was introduced to Christ. And even while in prison, began to introduce others to Christ, and on the outside of prison, established Freedom Fellowship Ministries that continues to reach those behind bars with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Here's what Chuck Colson said before he passed. He said, "Out of tragedy and adversity come great blessings. I shudder to think of what I would have been had I not gone to prison." Listen, it doesn't matter where you're at this morning, whether it's literal, whether it's figurative. When you find yourself in that place, when you are at rock bottom, when you are having everything stripped away, when you realize you are no longer in control, that is when God reaches in and does his best work. Not because of God, but because that's when you allow God to do his best work. Right? In fact, here's how the psalmist said it in Psalm 107. Psalm 107 verses 10 through 16 reads this way. Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in affliction and in irons, for they had rebelled against the words of God and spurned the counsel of the Most High. We've all been there. So he bowed their hearts down with hard labor. They fell down with none to help. They hit rock bottom. They had everything stripped away. They realized they were no longer in control. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death and burst their bonds apart. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. For he shatters the doors of bronze and cuts into the bars of iron. God does his best work while we're in prison. I'm going to end this message today. We're going to show you a video. This is a video that Aldersgate had the privilege to work on a year ago. It's very graphic in nature, and so if you've got small kids with you, I would encourage you to go ahead and pick them up and take them out into the lobby. It'll be shown on the TV out in the lobby, but we're going to watch this video. Remember, God's heart is for those in prison. Jesus' ministry was to those in prison, and so ours ought to be as well. Check this out.
Death row, a place reserved for the worst of the worst. Here, murderers, rapists, the vile and the unforgiven await their final verdict. But one day, we too will die. And in that sense, all of us are on death row.
Everything is broken down and gone, and I haven't found a way to get along. You're nothing. I know I have to stay, but all I wanna do is run. I feel it aching deep inside my heart.
Because he has died, we are free to walk in his forgiveness. No one deserves this freedom more than another, but because of his grace and his love for us, it has been offered freely to all. Some embrace the message of freedom and forgiveness, overwhelmed by his love. Others, unwilling to accept this message, choose to stay locked up in their pride. The door has been opened. You're free to walk through. You just have to take the first step. Believe that Jesus died and rose again so you could be free. Learn what the Bible says about who you are and what he wants your life to be. Transformation is a process. None of us are perfect, but all are offered freedom because of his sacrifice.
In the process of speaking a while ago, I think I said something backwards. It's all God. He's just asking for us to walk through the door he's already opened for us. We have a choice. We can walk through that door of freedom. On our own pride, we can slam the door shut.